I do think it's, as we look at this issue, there isn't any question, but that during the Cold War, we were particularly effective during a period of time. I remember I was in East Germany for a while and saw the impact of these broadcasts and saw how you did them wrong and how you did them right. The old bombastic West German broadcasts, people weren't interested in that. But when we recruited East German stringers and began to put those young reporters on the line, people were fixated on on what they had to hear. Over the years, we, I think, learned certain lessons. The State Department wanted us out of Yugoslavia on the broadcasting. I remember a young Croatian with tears in his eyes telling me that the hate radio dominated all over the former Yugoslavia, and that was one of the reasons, the fact that we had never really had effective broadcasting in there. I had legislation to try to do that, and I believe we finally got that through, and it got it up and running the day before we started bombing. I think it's very clear over the years that also the concept of a mission of trying to offset the totalitarian and especially the hate broadcasts that are done in these societies. We tried to, far prior to 9/11, and we tried to get broadcasting up and running, the right type of broadcasting in Afghanistan. I remember that struggle. I carried that legislation. Again, we didn't get that through until after the attack and after the death of the leader of the Northern Alliance. And I think that as we go forward, clearly we have to learn from what we did right. And that's why Mr. Wimbush's testimony is of tremendous interest to me, because during his tenure, we did something right. And it wasn't partisan. It was a nonpartisan effort to try to disseminate the facts about what was actually happening in that part of the world. Mr. Wimbush, would you like to extrapolate a little more? Because when you finished your testimony, you said if we wanted to hear more from you about specifics, you'd be happy to give us those specifics.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, like Jeff Hirschberg, I am not a big fan of putting it all within the State Department. It's one model, and I think you need to look at a number of different models. But I really think that this committee needs to hit for the fence. I think it needs to entertain a number of pathways to the goal you want, but for me, the one that stands out is far and away the most logical, and coincidentally the one that will lead inevitably to the fewest instances of backsliding into the current BBG dilemma, is to create one standalone media organization incorporating all of these existing media enterprises. Now, it puts a big load on your plate, because that means defederalizing the Voice of America and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. Frankly, this to me is far and away the best outcome that you could come up with. There are other models that you could look at that might put the Voice of America off by itself, and maybe it goes into state or stands alone, and the Radio Frees, the grantees, go in something else. What I would not do is organize in a way that enhances this distinction between telling America's story and doing surrogate broadcasting. When I was the director of Radio Liberty, one of the most important programs we put on the air, and I resisted it because a member of the BIB at that time told me he wanted something that told America's story. We put on a program from our New York office called Broadway 1776. It followed new emigres from Russia around the streets of New York, into the PTA, into the stores, into the intellectual institutions, into the museums. It was the most fantastic piece of surrogate broadcasting because it was about them, and it was one of the finest and most wonderful examples of telling America's story because it told how the whole thing worked. But look, in contrast, here is an announcement from the Voice of America, which is not supposed to be a surrogate station, although it's been practicing surrogacy for a long time. This is how they describe their new offering to South Sudan just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I quote, "With South Sudan in focus as its flagship program, the English language service will offer news for South Sudan, about South Sudan, and by South Sudan reporters." That is, for the country, about the country, by the country people. It's simply impossible to get more surrogate than that. So the objective, your objective, I think, should be to create as many possible synergies as you can without creating these firewalls, these barriers for the sharing of information, the creating of new images and messages, and the healthy functioning of the whole media organization as a single entity.
Any further suggestions, as long as you're here as a witness?
I will, in my written testimony, you'll see that I make a number of suggestions, but I would defer to my colleagues at this point.
Mr. Hirschberg.
I believe in taking on fights that you can have a chance of winning.
Mr. Hirschberg.
Sorry, is it there? There you
yes.
are. For the 8.5 years that I was on the board, we sort of took on fights that we thought we could win. Defederalizing VOA and OCB had been considered by the previous board for a number of years, and at that point in time we decided we could not do it. And so therefore we chose to do other things in our discretion. I'm not for a single necessarily broadcast entity. I think that the surrogates and VOA and MBN, on the other hand, do a very good job the way they are. I think there's a lot of things that can be done with respect to synergizing what they do. I think there's a lot of things that can be done vis-a-vis a management structure, and you could actually consolidate back office operations, consolidate IT, consolidate other things. That certainly can be done. Now, if you want to do that and create an entire broadcast, a single broadcast entity, that's your privilege. You can change the legislation to do that if that's what you want to do. I just don't see a need for it.
Well, you did speak about resources.
I certainly do.
And our resources aren't infinite.
Correct.
So the concept of merging the two, as Mr. Wimbush articulates, might not only lead to the added efficiencies, but might lead to the ability to do more programming effectively. As he ticks off the different dialects and languages that we do the broadcasting in, and there's probably 170, I would guess, or so, at least around the world. The reality is that there's a certain duplication there. So clearly, if you can consolidate that, you might, especially given the fact that you do have a lot of information around the world in terms of straight news. This is a little different mission, and consolidating that with the personnel that have those abilities in that niche to speak to those audiences and having them in the same operation might be tremendously more efficient. I don't know.
It may be more efficient, Mr. Chairman, but in the meantime, the GAO report on this did not go far enough to analyze duplicated versus unduplicated audiences, who listens to which of those services, what the effect of those services is, how what their audience reach is, what their credibility is. If you want to go to that step and then make the judgment as to whether or not the language services ought to be eliminated one way or another, that's just fine.
Well, I'm out of time. I'll go to Mr. Engel. Thank you.